November 30th, 2024. Well, we're at the end of November now. I want to kind of go in today a little bit about the coming Trump national security team and with the respect to the situation in the Ukraine war and what impact or what we can expect based on that. It's an interesting collection of individuals. Um, First of all, I guess we have Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, um, uh, Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense, John Radcliffe as CIA Director, Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. Um, let's see, Michael Waltz, who's a former Green Beret colonel, I think, as the National Security Advisor, and Keith Kellogg, who was Pence's National Security Advisor during the previous administration, retired Lieutenant General, as the representative to deal with both Ukraine and Russia, I guess, to try to negotiate the end of the war. So it's an interesting team. I mean, for the most part, I think it's a fairly hawkish group of people overall, with the notable exception of Tulsi Gabbard, who's, I guess, kind of the pacifist of the group, if you will. So this will be an interesting team that is being assembled, and hopefully, I guess they'll all get confirmed with the Senate. Some people think that Gabbard won't, but I see no reason why she shouldn't be. In fact, considering the rest of the individuals, it's probably good to have a little bit of that point of view in there. Um, so. And so that kind of plays into, what are we expecting here as the conflict continues. Now, of course, in recent days, the conflict has kind of escalated, both with the Russian reaction to the use of the NATO missiles, U.S. and British missiles, I think, and I guess some French. I don't think the French have arrived yet. In various attacks in the Kharkiv region and around it, and then the Russian use of the Osmotic missile. That's an interesting development here, and of course there's followed recently. There's been a pretty large series of something like 200 strikes throughout the country trying to knock out a lot of their electrical systems. So anyway, this is a interesting situation, and we'll have to kind of see how this develops. But I think it's interesting how this team will react to various things. Of course, ultimately the president will be calling the ultimate shots, of course, and so we'll have to see how that goes. If you like these videos, please give me a like. Always looking for more subscriptions. And of course, you can click the bell for notifications, or you can also follow me on Rumble, and the information for that's in the description below. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're looking at. We're expecting another one of these missile strikes is pretty much imminent. And we'll have to see exactly what that will consist of. As I understand, the original attack was using purely basically inert or just metal projectiles. But however, I'm also hearing that maybe the next one will include something else, some kind of maybe explosive warheads or something. So we can see how that goes. But it's interesting, again, to get back to what kind of peace plan that Trump has in mind. I did see some articles on this, and some of the plans seem to involve, ironically enough, the deployment of NATO troops as some kind of a peacekeeping force between the two sides, which seems to me to be not tenable. I mean, the NATO obviously is on the side of the Ukrainians, so how do you? It doesn't seem to me that's going to be considered to be a fair judge or anything the Russians would agree to. I mean, if you had countries from more neutral countries, say in Egypt or India, both of which are countries that have fairly large armies and would have enough troops that they probably could take on that role, probably with maybe some economic support from the U.S. perhaps. But you know, but but it's hard for me to buy the idea that NATO troops would go in between the Russians and Ukrainians to become some kind of arbiters. We'll see how that pans out. For the moment, the Russians are on the offensive and presumably will continue until Trump takes office, at least. And so far, he's been unable to end the war before he took office, as he was talking about. But that's understandable. A little bit of campaign hyperbole. Even if he is having a little bit of effect, maybe dealing with the Canada and Mexico. So, but yeah. So the one thing that's been raised in this whole thing, which on the article in Kellogg, which I think makes some sense and might be effective lever, and that is there's all these economic sanctions have been put on Russia that an offer to relieve some of those in return from a peace deal might make some sense. I mean, rather than trying to ratchet up the pressure and potentially have this escalate out of control to a complete catastrophe, it might be better to go the other way. That maybe carrots rather than sticks here might be the best way to deal with the situation. The problem is there's probably no way to solve the thing that won't leave the Ukrainians feeling betrayed, since they seem to be the ones that are intent on pursuing this conflict regardless of the losses. After all, the Russians, were certainly prepared to end it, a couple of months into the conflict and the negotiations in Turkey, which were then sabotaged by the British and probably the United States too, but definitely the British were the active agent in it. And so that's I'm hearing also talks of deploying large numbers of NATO troops, perhaps in other contexts as well, which to me sounds completely crazy as well. But we'll have to see how that develops. But right now we may be on the verge of another missile strike, which might be directed toward who knows what, political control centers in Kyiv, perhaps, or perhaps certain bunkers that are used to coordinate between Western officers and the Ukrainians, for instance, that might be actually directly instrumental in the transfer of data to launch these missiles. That's pre-selected targets, and so that's the kind of thing that we're kind of looking at now. I'm waiting to see what develops, but this team will be an interesting team to see how it works. I mean, I guess Gabbard and Hegseth, will be the two that may be the most controversial. Although on Gabbard, it's just a bunch of the fact that she isn't rah for all the wars. I think that's the main thing against her. They're trying to say she's sympathetic to somebody else, but I don't think it's so much that as I think she has definitely pacifistic tendencies. and Hegseth is probably not. It's pretty gung ho, I guess, but his whole thing is he's largely opposed to DEI and all trappings of neo-Marxism, of course, which is a good thing in my opinion. But that may be one of the reasons there'll be some oppositions there. There's also this issue of the encounter with this woman back in 2017 and her belated complaint, which we don't know what really happened there. I often thought that maybe if Hegseth's version, if he's convinced he's correct, he could perhaps take a polygraph test and that would provide evidence to support his position. Because after all, she apparently has a very fuzzy memory of exactly what happened, which is interesting also to note in this thing. But Waltz, I don't know a whole lot. He's a regular commentator. It seems like almost all the other people other than Gabbard have been sort of the opinion that we should escalate the conflict to put more pressure on the Russians, which is kind of interesting. So you have a dove in the midst of hawks. Yet the president himself is hard to say. He is a person that will do strong bluffs though, and so we don't know exactly how he's going to handle it. And that'll be interesting to see if he can really work out a cessation of this conflict. obviously the Russians are going, I don't even think the Russians are that much opposed to ending the conflict as such. The problem they have, and it's a pretty serious one, is what confidence they have that that a ceasefire won't simply be a break in which large amounts of armaments will eventually flow into the Ukrainian forces, and then the conflict will then recommence at a time and place of their choosing, some time in the not too distant future. But after they've been able to regroup from all this. And I don't know. On the other hand, I guess if there were to be finally to be some elections there, maybe Zelensky would be voted out of office and somebody that's more toward ending the conflict might win. There are some indications that the Ukrainian public is kind of fed up with the conflict, but that the leadership's elites are determined to press on. So that's another aspect of it. So exactly how that would be arranged is very difficult, and we'll have to keep an eye on all the developments. Meanwhile, apparently, the Biden has worked out a ceasefire between Hezbollah and the Israelis and Lebanon, and there will be supposedly be a mutual withdrawal of forces back to sort of neutral lines. I guess the Israelis back into their own territory, and the Hezbollah is supposed to withdraw back to north of the Litani River. So that's we'll have to see. Again, that's I think that's very, very shaky. And of course, what the ultimate outcome in Gaza is with respect to the releasing or at least accounting for the hostages and some kind of a peace deal with Hamas is a little bit up in the air. I have my doubts that many of the hostages are still alive. That is probably going to be more accounting for them than anything else. It's hard to know how many of them were actually murdered by the Hamas, how many of them were just died of deprivation or injuries they had received earlier, or how many actually were killed by the result of Israeli action due to the bombing they did. I mean, if they were in some of these buildings, I mean, that sort of thing would happen. So we're kind of looking forward to seeing how that'll all wrap up. It looks to me like, as I thought earlier on, this is just going to be another phase in the process. No real solution will be obtained, and someday in the future the thing will probably break out again. Because after all, it was a prospect of peace that started the initial October 7th of 2023 attack in the first place. So that if that wasn't in the offing, I doubt the attack would even happen. And then we still have the ongoing situation that you've got this Russian alliance with Iran, Russian alliance with North Korea, quasi-alliance with China, and how that all plays out, particularly with probably Trump's decision to try to embargo all the oil from for instance, Iran, to be going to anywhere to put pressure on them. How will China react to that? This is complex to say the least, but things, like I said, things have evolved in some bad ways, since then. Meanwhile, I guess we're waiting to see. Probably by the time that I quit posting these videos, we will probably know whether or not Russia does or does not launch the Oreshnik missile again, and what targets are identified. So that's about the way I see the situation for now, and we'll have to see whether or not we can kind of stabilize the world situation or whether things continue to spiral in a downward direction. And hopefully things don't get messed up by the outgoing Biden administration in the meantime. So anyhow, I'll be posting this on both YouTube and Rumble, and of course the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. All for now.